So yeah, the first time that I played that again was at Star Castle, and at the time the version that they actually had the Japanese version, so it wasn't Street Fighter Alpha, it was Street Fighter Zero Warriors Dreams. So that was my first time like ever actually running into it. The animation style I completely loved. It was a really good animation style. I think Bingus actually went buck nuts on the animation because he was coming like hot off of the Darkstalker series.
Yeah, that was a
And
huge influence on Alpha for sure.
oh yeah, so yeah, that was like a really good upsell for me. And then finally, I got to get a fighting game with my favorite video game character of all time, which was Guy from Final Fight. So I was using him like a freaking maniac the entire time, him and Kent.
And then
But yeah,
by the time 3 came out, you got Cody too. So you got Guy and Cody. So
oh
if
yeah,
there were any doubts, you had finally confirmed that Street Fighter and Final Fight and thus Saturday Night Slam Masters all took place in the same universe, which is incredible.
oh heck yeah. But yeah, that was my first occurrence running into the Street Fighter Alpha series. After that, as soon as they said it was on PlayStation, I got it for Christmas. That was all she wrote, bro. Like anybody that decided to play me in Street Fighter Alpha would have been destroyed.
I think of the series, I think 3 was probably, if one of them, if you had to pick one, I would say 3. I mean, you got the roster, you got the ultimate gameplay experience. They maximized it by that point. They're all pretty good, but they evolve. And for me, I definitely felt like the third one was the one to get. If you could only play one.
Yeah, the third one had a faster combo system, 3 different ways to play. They basically added anyone that wasn't already in the base game in the first 2, like, Bara, T-Hawk, DJ, all the missing characters, more new characters. Guile was thrown in there, like the whole fucking, even Evil Ryu and like the super version of Akuma is in there. Like, yeah.
Exactly. That's they were all good in their own way, but if you had to play one because of the roster and the gameplay experience, I would say that Street Fighter Alpha 3 would be the one to play. But yeah, that would be what I would think. Johnny, do you have any specific experience with the Alpha series, the anime-inspired Street Fighter series taking place between Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2?
Oh, I definitely love Street Fighter Alpha because of the animation style itself. Obviously, I'm a big Darkstalkers fan, so I love the way their games animate, and in that time anime was starting to get more and more popular. So it was very cool to have a fighting game that has anime style graphics that actually a lot of the characters look based from the animated movie. So it's very cool to see, especially in the later series, you see Kenny with the red hoodie that she wore in the movie, which of course her first appearance was in the Street Fighter versus X-Men, or was it X-Men versus Street Fighter?
Versus Street Fighter.
Once they, bring her to Street Fighter Alpha 3, and then you got Bison look like the M Bison for the movie, Vega looks like for the movie, Balrog looks like for the movie. Like, it's very cool how that first Street Fighter animated movie influenced a lot of Capcom's decision to make Alpha series to look pretty much similar in many ways from the movie. And then it's very interesting that in the original Street Fighter Alpha game, wasn't there a cheat code where you could fight Sagat in that grass background based from the Street Fighter animated movie intro?
I think there was
in Alpha 2 there was a hidden stage like that.
Wasn't it like a dramatic battle or something they called it?
Yeah, something like that. I'm surprised the NES version kept it because I was expecting, some of these things to be skipped, but no, they had that there too. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought that was a neat addition.
The Mexican market, even in the Capcom of Mexico, they had Street Fighter, Alpha called Street Fighter Zero, just how it was. So that's kind of like an interesting fact. So it's like people in Mexico, they're going to know the game more as Street Fighter Zero versus, Street Fighter Alpha.
So at that time, rather than go into Street Fighter 3 as everybody expected, Capcom was getting the most they could out of the 2D sprite-based fighting game series with the Alpha series. On the other side of the coin, they still didn't do a Street Fighter 3 yet. There was another series that some people have very mixed opinions on. There was a lot of pressure at that time, 1995, 1996, for fighting games to get into the 3D polygon-based sphere, pun intended. So Capcom felt pressure to get in on that as well. So instead of going directly into Street Fighter 3, which they weren't really sure how that was going to go yet, they pivoted into a series called Street Fighter EX. Came out in 1996. Polygon-based spin-off. Made for the PS1 and the arcade. There was a couple updates for that. It was a 2D fighter in a 3D arena. The fighters were polygon-based models. Had some of the fighters from Street Fighter 2, but a bunch of new characters as well. To this day, very split opinions on it. So let's talk about the EX series a little bit, because I know that it's sort of the black sheep to a lot of people. It didn't even appear on the Anniversary Collection, which disappointed me. But yeah, let's talk about EX a little bit.
Okay, so the reason why it didn't show up on that Anniversary Collection is actually, as I've talked about, Capcom does like a lot of weird collabs. The Street Fighter versus SNK, the Street Fighter Cross Tekken. That one, the reason why that doesn't show up is that was another collaboration. Fighting EX Lair was actually its own game by a company called Eureka, who were actually former Capcom members once again, and they hooked up with Capcom. Hence the reason why you see certain characters from Street Fighter in it, as well as the new characters. The new characters were actually from EX Lair and from the previous version of it, like Schneider, Skullomania, P. Volcano, D. Dark. Those characters were actually established in that game. Street Fighter was actually a special guest to it. Now, as far as the system goes, to me personally, it's a cancel crazy fest that I just love. It's literally Japan's answer to Killer Instinct, as far as I'm concerned, because there's so many different movesets that you can do and cancel out of one super into another super into another super. Yeah, it was a really fantastic game, and I wish that Capcom would somehow manage to talk to Eureka and acknowledge it and put it on one of those anniversary games. But unfortunately, due to the fact that it's mixed in with another company, they can't do it.
See, I knew none of that, so I'm glad you did. That explains so much right out of the gate. I remember playing them on the PlayStation, the first two anyway. My buddy Danny would rent them because he lived right across the street from a rental store. So I used to sleep over his house on the weekends, and we would get pizza and rent games and videos. And I remember playing some version. I don't know if it was EX or EX Plus or Plus Alpha. I know we played EX2 at some point. But yeah, I know we played a couple of those EX games, and I had fun with them, even though, again, I'm not good at these games. I can barely beat the computer. I can get through the arcade mode most of the time, but that's about it. But I had fun with them. And, yeah, it definitely was different seeing the Street Fighter characters as these polygon models instead of the hand-drawn sprites. It was jarring in a way, and it felt different. It looked different. But, you know, it was an experiment. Fighting games were in a very experimental stage at that point. You look at 96, 97, 98, and you look at what was coming out from series like Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, and across the board, you were seeing a lot of experimentation. And that's part of why they kept putting off Street Fighter 3, because with the way the market was changing so fast, Capcom literally didn't know what they wanted that game specifically to be yet. So instead of doing a 3, which everybody expected and wanted them to do, they kept doing things like Alpha and EX, which allowed them to play around in the fighting game space using familiar IP and characters, but not committing to something like Street Fighter 3, which is a brand, was so important that they really couldn't afford to have it fail. So they couldn't really tinker with it too much. They had to make sure it was going to be perfect to their expectations, at least. So yeah, that's why they did these kind of things. And it was really exciting to me to see them play around with those different approaches between the Alpha and the EX. EX was always very controversial because of its look and its gameplay. But yeah, I know you said you loved it. Well, fact is, a lot of people loved it, despite the fact that it's kind of the black sheep of the Street Fighter series. At the time it came out, the reviews were through the roof. It was getting 9 out of 10s all over the place.
Yeah, I think the game was very good on its own. And I liked how you could, mix all the super combos together. Like, how Chun-Li would do her kick version of the super combo, then the Hiko show, and then she would do again kicking. Like, mix all that up, and the gameplay was very fast. And okay, maybe not the first one because I think the characters were that was like kicking back then in terms of polygon game, but it was a weird game in its way because it seems the characters looking kind of like Tekken / virtual characters. Like the whole gimmick, like the whole style, it's just weird. Like you don't picture that in a Street Fighter 2 game. And I think the game still it's good on its own, but I think that the timing that the game came out was in a weird. I would say it was in Capcom's dark period of time. I think that was like the darkest hour, so to say. Like between that game and between Street Fighter 3, I think they didn't really have too much luck. I think it just came out in a weird time period.
Well, I mean, again, that was a time when the whole genre was undergoing a lot of experimentation, and that game series really defied a lot of expectations. And anytime you do that, you're going to be controversial. But it did sell pretty well, and it got great scores across the board. All 3 games did pretty well in that regard. I mean, people who played them enjoyed them, but then later on, people would look back on them and have kind of mixed feelings. It's weird, but it's kind of what happens. Anytime you have something that looks and feels dramatically different from what you're used to, you're going to get a lot of split opinion. But, they weren't ready to commit to a 3D fighting style, and they decided to do something kind of halfway in the middle. And I thought for what it was pretty good.
Can I also add to the soundtrack of, I forgot about the other games, but the first EX game, I love the soundtrack. Like some of the music's really good, actually. The voices is good, and yeah, it's just like a very good. For what it's worth, it was still a good Street Fighter. It's just, kind of like that.
It wasn't what you'd expect from Street Fighter, but it was still good.
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah, one thing I want to say, I'm surprised Johnny didn't bring this up, but what happened is we used to go to an arcade store nearby where we used to go, and they had Street Fighter EX plus Alpha, because that was a thing in Mexico. Once the PS2 and all those, PS1, once the PS1 and then consoles started popping up, the PS1, I think the Dreamcast and all them, instead of bringing actual cabinets, they would like hook up the console within the cabinet and charge people to play the game that way to save money, because Mexico couldn't afford, brand new cabinets, you know what I mean? So anyways, that's why the Neo Geo is so popular in Mexico. You don't have to bring a new cabinet, just exchange the carts, But anyways, we were playing Street Fighter EX plus Alpha. We were impressed by the graphics. They look kind of blocky, but it was still cool. It played like Street Fighter. They did the thing like Tekken where the camera angle changes when you do a throw and all that kind of shit. We went to a trip to the States around that general time, and they had a PS1 for sale because, that was still during the time, PS2 didn't exist yet or whatever. So we bought a PS1, and, it only came with a crappy demo disc. I think it was like Parappa the Rappa and some other games. It's not an actual game. Just like the first stage of Parappa and some other games coming soon, buy them now, that kind of shit.
Yeah,
So,
I remember those.
They were nice enough to buy us Street Fighter EX plus Alpha to, actually have a game with it and everything. And there we go. So our minds were blown that the same game we saw in the arcade like 2 days ago now is in our house, and we were playing this shit out of that. We didn't go to the arcade for a month because we were like we got the game here, man, and that kind of stuff.
Like that's the thing. I am aware that the series has a very mixed reputation in hindsight. Like some people go so far as to say that they don't like it, but I mean, people liked it a lot when it came out. Each of the 3 games sold really well, and the reviews for all 3 games were really good. They started off the strongest, and then the reviews and the sales were a little bit less each time, but they all did really well. So it's weird. I think the somewhat mixed reception in hindsight simply is that it's not what you imagine when you close your eyes and think Street Fighter, but I kind of think that's unfair. I'm always saying you got to try to judge things for what they are, not what they're not. And I think for what it was, an experimental game using familiar IP, I mean, I think they did really well with it for what it's worth. And it also was an illustration of how the brain was adaptive to the changing medium, because with the 3rd game, EX3 in 2000, that originally came out for the PS2, not the arcade. That was the first Street Fighter game to release to consoles. So that was innovative in and of itself. That was a big, huge deal. And that game added tag battles to it. And then, that was, there was a lot of good stuff happening within that series. That's why it's weird to me that a lot of people look back on it with some sort of like mixed opinion, because I don't know. I think they're blowing smoke. I think it's better than its reputation. All 3 of them.
Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to say, though, one thing that the EX games actually introduced that would later come back in the canon games was that attack they do where it's kind of slow, and if it lands a hit, the person gets knocked dizzy. Street Fighter 4 kind of sort of did a variation of that. I think it's called the focus attack in Street Fighter 4. And then Street Fighter 6, this new guard crush, it's pretty much a kind of sort of reinvention of that. So EX did kind of help a bit with that,
Well, each of the different series kind of added its own innovation, and they all borrowed from each other. That's one of the coolest things about the Street Fighter series to me, is that as they went on, they each kind of borrowed and took away and used each other for different things. It was never the same thing exactly twice. It has a reputation for being repackaged and recycled, but that's oversimplification. Each game in the series, even within the spin-off series, each one sort of added little things and big things that would come back later on eventually. So yeah, all of that was very much, and to that effect too, not just in the EX series, but a lot of things that would become standard in the Street Fighter series were borrowed directly from the Versus series. So we got to talk about those games real quick. We got to talk about stuff like the Marvel Versus series. We got to talk about the Tekken X Street Fighter, all that good stuff. Let's talk real quick about the crossover media games. All of those were pretty big in their own right. You got your SNK versus Capcom and all that shit.
I mostly remember, I think we saw X versus Street Fighter in the wild first before we saw any magazine talk about it. So we were like, the fuck is this shit, until EGM told us more about it. But that was just a weird idea. But, I mean, the graphics made sense. The graphics of Children of the Atom mixed with the Alpha ones. Now, the funny thing is, most people don't know this, but Akuma was a hidden character in X-Men Children of the Atom. But the thing is, since this was still during the Super Street Fighter era, this was before the Alpha games, Akuma's sprite still looked like the more realistic Street Fighter 2 style. It wasn't until, they made the legit X Versus series where you got an Alpha sprite and all that.
I mean, it was just so amazing. You had the X-Men versus Street Fighter, and then you had the Marvel X-Men, Marvel versus X-Men, and then it was Marvel Capcom. And all of those different series, and that was amazing, and then you also had like the Tatsunoko versus Capcom stuff. I love that game for the Wii. I really had a blast playing that game. SNK Capcom, all those things, man. It goes to show you how penetrative the Street Fighter 2 characters more specifically because they kept showing up in all these crossover games.
Yeah, those I think we're gonna go. Those probably deserve their own episode. To be honest,
yeah,
to go
for
deeper
sure.
into those. But
For
I do
sure.
want to say, similar to how Street Fighter.
You can't
Yeah.
talk about Street Fighter without at least mentioning those games because it shows just how big a deal Street Fighter 2 was because those characters, even their alpha versions of them in some cases, but it was the characters everybody loved from Street Fighter 2. Being seen, being representing the brand, taking on Wolverine and Captain America and Spider-Man, like that was a huge deal. Let's be honest. It shows how big a deal Street Fighter was, and specifically how big a deal Street Fighter 2 was at that time.
Yeah, the one thing I do want to say is that just like how Street Fighter 2 milked the fuck out of the game, I think between Alpha and the Versus games, Capcom milked the fuck out of those Alpha sprites before it finally did like Street Fighter 3.
Yeah. But yeah, those games were great too. I mean, especially on the Saturn versions. Like I picked up a few of them recently. I mean, some of them were hard to get in America, but they were worth the effort to buy them. Some of them are. I got some of the Japanese imports for like the X-Men versus Street Fighter, Marvel versus Capcom, the originals. Some of them never legit came out in this country, but they're cheaper to get the Japanese ones. The American ones are fucking ridiculous, but they still play in America, the English, and everything, even though it's the Japanese versions. You just have to have the RAM cart and a Game Shark or whatever. Codebreaker, that's what it is. Whatever the fuck it is. So yeah, I actually got my fucking Saturn hooked up over here with that plugged in right now. I got some of the, actually, yeah, what do I got right here? Hang on one second. Oh, it's, yeah, there we go. I forgot to pull this out. X-Men Street Fighter from Saturn.
One thing I want to add also is that what's also cool about this game is that, Street Fighter is in Japan. Like it's originally made in Japan. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting to have, characters based on a Japanese video game made in Japan. To have these characters cross over to fight, against American comic book characters. You're not fighting against anime, characters. You're fighting against US of A comic book characters. So that's a very, very interesting. That just shows how international Street Fighter is.
Yeah, like video game wise, this was like the forbidden door for video games. That's exactly what it was. MVC2.
And check it out. Isn't this a steal?
Holy shit, man.
And nowadays, it would cost like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, like.
I mean, I actually, it's not Street Fighter, but I got my copy of X-Men Children of the Atom right here. I think the case is custom, but I still paid a lot. I still paid a pretty good deal for it. But let's be honest, these games are worth it. I mean, the Saturn ports of these games were as close as you could get to the arcade back then. Let's be real.
Definitely.
So basically, I think
one
we should
version
probably,
the PS1
wrap it up with Street Fighter 3, and then maybe the next episode we could do 4, 5, and 6, and anything, and the cartoon, whatever else. Because this will be forever with how many games we got.
Yeah, that'll be 3 is a good place to put a pause mark on it for now because 4 could be its own thing entirely, as could 5. So yeah, let's do 3 because that was finally in 1997 the thing people waited so long to get, and then it kind of wasn't what they expected. So yeah, let's round it off with Street Fighter 3, which once more, by the time the final version came out, it became kind of a well-respected thing. But Street Fighter 3 wasn't as successful for Capcom as Street Fighter 2, to be gentle about it.
I don't know if you could see it, but I found like the character references for Street Fighter 3. And this big monster that I've got here.
Speaking of big monster, I just want to say my favorite Street Fighter 3 character is Elena.
Heck yeah. My favorite character actually, again, was a joke character, but I was good with him, and it was Sean Matsuda. again, like you said, with 3, that was the game that everyone wanted, but nobody expected because, like, the animation, flawless, 60 frames per second, excellent new animator. Kinu Nishimura was going all out on the animation. The gameplay, though, was very, very rough on the first one. They didn't really perfect it until Third Strike. To me, that was the best one out of the series. But as far as that first one, the gameplay was really rough, but it did introduce a new mechanic that they've added later on down the line, even down to 6, which was the parry mechanic. This was where literally you had to be really quick, and as an opponent was about to hit you, you had to go back and forth with the controller, and it would do a parry attack, which would lead them up into an attack. It brought in one of the biggest moments in Evo history. I honestly don't think the Evo game community would have gotten as big if it was not for the video of Daigo Uehara basically taking Chun-Li Super and decimating it with Kin, doing parries. I don't think Evo would have gotten on the map if it was not for that whole situation. So yeah, that to me, that was a big, big shift as far as fighting games and everything as a whole. Not to mention, there was a bit more of an urban flair to this one, especially if you listen to the soundtrack. It had a lot more there was a lot more hip hop involved, a little bit more techno. There was more graffiti art in the game. So yeah, that was my view on that. Sorry to kind of go off on a rant, but you're up.
Well, the thing is, there's a lot to talk about with the game because for as much as it's got, again, a bad reputation, like people have a bad view, especially the original Street Fighter 3 New Generation. I think much of that has to do with the fact simply that Ryu and Ken were the only returning characters, and people were put off by that, especially. The new cast was kind of well received for what they were, but let's be honest, people wanted more than just Ryu and Ken from the original cast. But I think it's a little unfair that it was judged so harshly based on that, because objectively, at the time it came out, it reviewed very, very well. People who played the game loved the game. And it took a lot from Darkstalkers, it took a lot from X-Men Children of the Atom, and it melded that with some of the functions of the earlier Street Fighter games. And it was an adjustment, it was an evolution, it was different, but I think it was more different than people expected it to be. And I think that and the fact that originally the cabinets, they just said 3 new generation of fighters, that there was a lot of things that threw people off about the original release. But it was well received. They got better reviewed as they went along. I think Third Strike, by the time that came out, I think that was very much a well-respected, well-regarded version of the game, but it definitely had a rough launch.
Third Strike were one of the games on the 15th anniversary collection. But with Street Fighter 3, I never played Street Fighter 3 because at that point it was more like, okay, Alpha, like you were talking about the release of the Street Fighter 2 stuff. Oh, we got Alpha, we got another Alpha, we got another Alpha. I said, when are we going to get 3? And it's sort of like I just totally missed all of that, honestly, until that collection came out and Street Fighter 4. So that's pretty much the last Street Fighter game I played was 4 in Japan in the arcades.
The joke at the time was that Capcom could only count to 2.
Well, that was my belief. Seriously, I was like, where is 3? Like that.
Yeah. That was something they were so afraid to screw up that they used Alpha and EX to do their experimental stuff while they kept 3 on the back burner until they could get it right. So they thought they got it right. And then 3, it was good for what it was, but it definitely wasn't what anybody expected.
Now, you were talking about like the Street Fighter characters being like and having a new cast. This was almost a commercial flop because originally
almost
Ken and Ryu were not going to be in there. The only Shoto base character was going to be Sean, and the main character of the Street Fighter 3 series was actually Alex. He was the main protagonist. It wasn't Ryu and Ken.
You watching, William?
Yep, that is the picture of Dan, original picture of Dan Hibiki.
Yep. And a very special someone close to my heart gave me this book as a nice surprise I wasn't expecting.
That's awesome.
That's a person that
Love the
shall
artwork
remain
there.
nameless, but she's a real sweetheart.
Aw.
She's pretty close and dear to us all. But anyways,
But one thing I would like to add is that Street Fighter 3, of course, at the beginning, especially the first game, it was very controversial for all the reasons you guys have explained. But I do feel like over time, I think the game still aged well, and it's kind of like a legend of its own. Like people to this day still talk about Street Fighter 3, and I think Street Fighter 3 was still ahead of its time.
well, the thing about Street Fighter 3 is it came out at the wrong time, I guess. It just didn't catch on in the arcades. I remember the very few times we played it, I just didn't like it because everyone felt so shitty and weak. Like he like I wanted to try out the new characters, but they all sucked. Like you kind of had to use Ryo and Ken, you know? Like I wanted to use Elena, I wanted to use Ibuki, they were weak as shit, you know? And now, like, you know, when the consoles came out, compilations came out, everyone goes back and everyone's like, oh my God, these games are good. Ooh, the mechanics are deep and the parry, you know, like William said with the Evo stuff, that made it big. And of course, the characters keep coming back in Street Fighter 4 and 5. You got Ibuki, Elena, Oro, and all them. But when it first came out, yeah.
It's kind of like pretty much like the beginning of Street Fighter 4 in a way. It kind of introduced some of the concepts that you would see in the more recent, more modern, you know, installation of the Street Fighter series. So I kind of like Street Fighter 3 for what it was in the time, and you know, you have to, you know, the graphics are really good too. Like I love the very animated, like these characters animate so well.
Oh yeah.
Just phenomenal game in its own, but it just came out in a weird time period, and you know, the first game was just kind of like I don't know, it was kind of lackluster a little bit here and there. I wanted to make it too different from the other Street Fighter games.
When I finally played it, because I never encountered it in any form in the arcade. Point of fact, the original release of Street Fighter 3 New Generation, I think only sold about 10,000 cabinets. It was a huge failure for Capcom. The later updates, Second Impact and Third Strike, did much, much better. But yeah, the original Street Fighter 3 was a huge disaster, which was why they almost immediately updated it with Second Impact, which added a lot of stuff they had hoped to include with the original release. Like they added bonus rounds for the first time since forever in the series. They added more special moves. They tightened up the gameplay. They added the EX specials, more powerful versions of your special moves. They put in some more characters people wanted. They put in a couple guys from Final Fight again, which was cool. So right away, they realized they needed to upgrade what they were doing, and they did that the same year with Second Impact. And already you could tell they were kind of committing to doing better. And then that was pretty good for a while. And then by the time Third Strike came out, that was, again, like Alpha, the perfected version. Like, this is the game everybody pretty much wanted from the beginning. I think, again, if you were only going to play one, you should play Third Strike. But I will say that I never played any of them originally until I got the Anniversary Collection. And just like with Alpha, playing each of them in order and feeling the evolution of each one was really, really tangible. But at the same time, yeah, you felt a lot of progression with each one, but I really felt like Third Strike was, I don't want to say the only one worth playing, but it's definitely the one to play if you can only play one.
One thing I remember, one of those consoles, because it took a while for us to get a copy of Street Fighter 3. I think the first time we ever like legit played Street Fighter 3 was one of those compilations, because I think it was like a Street Fighter 1 and 2. I think Street Fighter 1 came out with Super Street Fighter and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and then the second disc was Gold. Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, I mean. Then the second collection had the original Street Fighter World Warrior Champion Edition and Turbo. Then the second disc had Street Fighter 3 Third Strike or so. No, wait, no. That was weird. No, I'm sorry. The anniversary, I think the one that Wendy was showing, the anniversary collection, that one had like this weird mega mix. It was like Super Street Fighter Turbo. We could also pick the characters to fight like the way they did in the older Street Fighter games, but it had Third Strike on it. So that's like the main way Johnny and I got to play Third Strike more, more consistently, because until they released, of course, the PS4 compilation years down the line. But yeah, we just never really had good access to it and everything. I'm trying to remember what Double Impact had. I know one of the consoles had one that was called like Double Impact or something, where it had both New Generation and Second Impact in the same disc, but that was either I think Dreamcast or Saturn, one of those.
Yeah, that was one of the home ports for sure.
Yeah, I actually ended up playing Third Strike on, oh dear, what system was it? It was the Dreamcast.
Yes, Third Strike did come out for the Dreamcast.
Yeah, which
okay.
That controller, you want to talk about like trying to be skilled? If you tried to do that whole Daigo Uehara Chun-Li parry on a Dreamcast controller, you were the fucking man. Because there's no way that I could do that shit.
Dude, I love the Dreamcast. I bought one in January specifically to play a bunch of Japanese import wrestling games, which I did, and I have. And I got a dozen of them, and they're great. They're awesome. But I love the Dreamcast, but that controller is the shits, bro. It's the shits. It's the fucking worst.
Now, one thing I want to say is, I believe in the original, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I think in the New Generation, Yoon and Yang were basically the same character, in the sense that if you press like the punch button to get Yoon, and you press the kick button to get Yang, whichever, So Second Impact made Yoon and Yang two individual characters with different attacks. They added Hugo, they added Akuma, and they added Urien. And then Third Strike added, of course, everyone's favorite, added Chun-Li in there. Then they added 11 and who was the other person? No, not 11, 12, I'm sorry, right? 12? 12.
Yeah. Q, and Makoto, Remy.
Thank you. Yeah, Makoto and Remy. Which we still don't know to this day why Remy can throw sonic booms. And that was it, right? The characters, I think.
That was it. And it's funny because as rough as the original release was, and how poorly selling it was, and how it had pretty much one of the worst launches of any fighting game in history, Street Fighter V kind of matched that. But yeah, Street Fighter 3 had a rough launch, but by the time of Third Strike, it was Street Fighter 3 Third Strike is to this day considered to be one of the best fighting games ever made. So it just goes to show you, if you keep plugging away at it and you're willing to improve and keep tweaking and really commit to putting out a better product, you can go from zero to hero as long as you stick with it. It took them 3 years to put out the proper version of Street Fighter 3, but they got there. So good for them.
I forgot they also added Q in there, a mysterious guy with the trench coat.
Well, I mean, wasn't he trying to warn him about the Borg or some shit?
I don't know.
Is that different Q?
His whole hard. He was just a mysterious guy. But Street Fighter 5 has a character that they hint that could be Q, but we don't know. Because at the same time, I think in Third Strike, wasn't Q's ending hinting there's tons of him all over the world or some shit? So that whole shit with him was just weird.
Yeah, and to be brutally honest with you, if you look at their character animations, going back to the cross-referencing, a lot of people think that Q might be G.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But I call bullshit on that. Like, honestly, I think they somehow managed to take Nikali and put him in the suit for G for Q, because if you look at Q when he gets shocked, he's the only one that doesn't have a skeletal system. And also his attacks, his moveset, even his super are similar to Nikali's. So honestly, that's who I think it is. I think somehow they drop Nikali and put him in the suit. I don't know.
Wendy, what were your thoughts on G when you saw him, Mr. President of the world?
I mean, what did you think about Street Fighter 3 in general? Because when you
I never played it.
Well, you were so impatient to get it, and when it came out, you never even played it?
No. I mean, I never knew it fully existed until after the fact. I was like, oh, there was a 3. It's like a 3 came out. It was like,
Yeah.
whatever. Because it's like me with Kingdom Hearts. I hate using Kingdom Hearts as my example. It'll always be my example of a game series I'm waiting for something for, and if I don't get it when I first want it, I gradually lose interest in it. And that's kind of what happened with Street Fighter with me.
Whoa. Did you compare Kingdom Hearts to Street Fighter?
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, that's it. Ninja vanish. I'm out.
No, like I said, it took like 50 years just to get Kingdom Hearts 3? They just kept re-releasing crap and then putting all those little mini games in between. That's how I felt about Street Fighter 2. I mean, it's like, okay, Street Fighter 2. Then they started with the Alpha series. I didn't have a console to play Alpha series on. Not really, anyway. And then, because like I said, it was mostly like PlayStation, Sony, and all that stuff. And like I said, it was something I wanted to do was to backtrack and play some of these older games. But going back to the president of the world here, all I remember doing is laughing. Lots and lots of laughter. Because of how cheesy it was. And you know how I like cheese.
Mm-hmm. Light it up. And there's a fire coming out. And
Well, I got to tell you, this thing is cheap and readily available, and it has all the Street Fighter 2s, all the Alphas, and all the Street Fighter 3s. Highest possible recommendation, because I am just a basic bitch when it comes to Street Fighter, but this collection was totally a godsend, and it's got everything except the EX stuff, and I couldn't recommend it more.
Yeah, the EX stuff I remember.
You got to pick this up, and then you can finally play 3, because it's on there, all the versions of 3, all the versions of Alpha, all the stuff you never played. You got to pick this up.
I know I was surprised when when 3 finally came out, but like I said, I didn't have any way of playing it anyway, so it just kind of just kept on going. Just kept on going to the next thing.
Well, now you're grown up. There's no excuses. If I can do it, you can do it.
I miss my PS2. That's all I'm saying. I really miss my PlayStation 2. Whatever. But yeah, I don't have the things. But like I said, the last thing I played was probably Street Fighter 4 and 4 in the arcades and when I was in Japan. And Street Fighter 5 here about a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we're definitely going to, like Mark said, we're going to do a whole thing. We're going to pick it up again with 4, 5, and even 6, because there'll probably be more to talk about with 6 by that point. But yeah, we have pretty much done everything we can for Street Fighter, except for the comic books. We can maybe talk a little bit about that next time. But yeah, there was some comic book stuff too. But we
Roxx.
I will say this. I have a strong interest in Street Fighter 6. I legit do. But like I said, I don't have a PS5. I do not have a PS4. I only have a PC. I don't like Xbox controllers. And that's the only way I would be able to play on a PC if I use a Microsoft controller. I just want to do it for the world tour mode. The world tour mode. That's the main thing I wanted to play with that game. And even before the release of Street Fighter 6, I had to remind Mark when the game came out, and I wasn't getting it. I had to remind him that it came out on June the 2nd because I want to see gameplay footage. But anyway,
next time you hang out with him, he's got to make sure you play those games because he was just showing it off. So he's got it. So no excuses. Next time you guys hang out, you got to play those Street Fighter games.
Definitely. I'll have to. I mean, at least to see 3 because, like I said, that's just a game I just totally, completely, fully missed because one, like I said, in a general sense, I didn't really have a way of playing it because I didn't have a gaming console where I could play it. And
now, here's the weird thing about this game, though. The interesting thing about this game is you got to be up on your Street Fighter, and I mean all of them when you go online. Because you go online, the way this game works is that you have the choice of either playing Super Street Fighter Turbo, I think the original Street Fighter 2, what's it called? Alpha 3, and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. So you're hopping online. You choose, let's say, Third Strike, he chooses Super Turbo. It kind of goes like a flip of the coin, and bam, you're playing that game. So you got to be good on it. You can't be like, Like, I'm gonna challenge this guy in Super Street Fighter Turbo. Like, that's my game. I know everything. And all of a sudden, oh shit, Street Fighter 3, what the
See,
fuck?
that's
I
another.
only played this once. You know what I mean?
But see, that's
I
another
don't
problem
feel
with me too. That's another problem with me too. I'm very, very casual, and I'm not really good at fighting games. I'm a little better with. I have more fun with beat 'em up games than to play actual fighting games, which is why with Street Fighter 6, I'm glad there's that world tour mode because it's more story RPG kind of like based as opposed to just pure fighting.
You know what I was gonna say, as somebody who's not good at fighting games myself, playing the 30th anniversary collection. I played it on the Xbox One, but some people like the PS controller better. But as somebody who is not good at them myself, I was able to play and beat. I don't know if I didn't beat all of them, and there was one I missed maybe. But yeah, like I had a good time with them, and I'm not good at these games at all. So it was really fun playing all of them in order from Street Fighter 1. Not fun with that one, but just seeing how it all started. But playing Street Fighter 2, World Warrior, all the way up through Super Street Fighter 2, through the alphas, through the threes. By the time you get to Third Strike, it's like you're playing the perfected, crystallized version, gameplay-wise, of Street Fighter. But yeah, playing through that evolution of the series, I love that compilation. It's definitely one of the best compilation games a person could possibly have if they have any interest at all in fighting games. But it's a great package. I think I paid like not even $30 for it when it came out. And
Yeah,
I
it's
know
pretty
most
cheap.
people
It wasn't. It was like $30 or something.
yeah, and I literally I got it from my wife, but we both played the hell out of it because especially me because I was having fun with it for the first time ever on most of those games. Most of those games were brand new to me, so I was so happy to be able to play 3 for the first time, all the versions of it, some of the alpha stuff I never played. Talk about value, like you get one. Guys, you get so many games on the disc. It's really
Yeah.
awesome. It's such a
The
history.
closest we had was they released on the PS2. I can't find it somewhere in there, but Street Fighter Alpha Anthology had Alpha 1, 2, and 3 and Pocket Fighter all
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
collection. And that was as close as I could get before I got this,
Wait a minute. PS2? I don't remember that.
Oh yeah, we had that. There was a lot of great compilations across time and consoles. Yeah. I mean, this is like the ultimate one, but there were a lot of good ones for a lot of different consoles between like 97 and 2012 or somewhere around there. Like there was a lot of good stuff that came out. There was the Alpha collection, like you said. There was a few different ones.
Oh, man. Too bad I missed out on Alpha too, because like I said, my cousins had it because they had the PlayStation stuff. I always had Nintendo stuff. So like I said, they had all that stuff and I didn't. Which is why I can't say, I may have I mostly watched them play, but I didn't really play with them. You know what I mean? In my case. So, that's why I missed out on so much.
The series definitely evolved a lot within a few years, within the decade of 1991 with Street Fighter 2 came out in 1991, and then Street Fighter 3 Third Strike came out in 2000. So you have almost 10 years of this franchise with more than 10 games within that decade. So you saw a lot of experimentation. You saw a lot of evolution. You saw cartoons, you saw an animated series, you saw movies, you saw a lot of things come out from this franchise within less than 10 years.
Ah, yeah, I remember that cover. I think Kevin and them had, I don't know why I would say Kevin and them had it. My cousins, I think they had that. I mean, the cover is familiar, or either maybe I've seen it in a video store. Where's the memory card?
I got it somewhere.
Oh, I missed that too. I wish I had my memory cards. I missed my PS.
I got like 2 or 3 of them.
I still have all my old stuff. I still got all the old discs and memory cards. They're over there. I didn't have time to dig them all out, but I got a couple of the other compilations and stuff like that. Like I said, I get them for my wife mostly, but we both end up playing the hell out of them eventually.
I still got Alpha 3 for the PS1 too. I'll probably play it one of these days, make some videos. I want to replay the World Tour mode that they had and record it all, for a video series or something. But What was the thing? I like that one because as you play it, you unlock Guile, you unlock Evil Ryu and everything. And I think that was the very first game, at least for our consoles, that actually had like www.capcom.com on it. And we were like, oh my God, because, the internet, that kind of shit. So,
You know what we almost forgot to talk about with the Street Fighter 3 series was like they added like rival fights for certain
Yeah.
characters. Like
That was like about
that was
Alpha, that it wasn't Bison all the time, unless of course it was like Chun-Li. Every character had a different rival, so depending who you pick, it's a different ending and different whatever, and the dialogues and stuff.
yeah,
It
you'd have a
added more
different
to the
final boss.
characters.
You'd have a different final boss depending on who you picked, and along the way, you'd end up fighting your rival somewhere along the chain. So that was like it was a cool little thing, man. It added some story to the general ladder aspect of fighting games. I thought that was really cool.
So one last thing, in Street Fighter Alpha 3, who can remember Bison's Super Psycho Crusher shit?
Oh God, no.
Where if you so much as breathe wrong, he'll warp and then just until you're fucking dead.
Oh, Ricky, I don't know if you ever caught this one, but in Street Fighter 3, you were talking about the rivals. When you use Alex and you're going up against Hugo, at the beginning of the round, they're standing there like face to face. Alex is looking up at him, Hugo's looking down at him, and then they kind of do a chest bump and they start the match. That was actually supposed to be reminiscent of the WrestleMania match between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. If you look at a side-by-side comparison of the drawing at the beginning of the round to the picture in WrestleMania, it's a complete 100% like.
I actually missed that because without joking, I actually mostly either played Street Fighter. I mostly play as Ryu. That's mostly. Yeah, but then like in Street Fighter 3, I mostly played as Elena. But yeah, like I missed some stuff because I only usually play as the same couple characters. But I will say that having the compilation did make it easy for me to experiment with people I didn't usually play as. But I didn't get through everybody, unfortunately, so I did miss that one. But I'm definitely going to have to go back and look for it now.
Yeah.
That
it's
is
quite
cool.
an insane reference, and the only person that breaks it up is like as they're staring each other down, Poison walks by and Hugo kind of looks at her and he's like, all right, that's it, let's go.
That was interesting though. That kind of like Poison would cameo alongside Hugo. That would eventually lead to her like actually being a fighter in other games and stuff.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely get there with the variations of Street Fighter 4 when we reconvene. I'm expecting next time we're going to talk probably more about the Versus stuff, and then into 4 and 5, and now the recent release of 6. There'll probably be a little bit more to talk about. But yeah, I mean, we still got a lot. We covered a lot, but there's still a lot to cover. But we definitely covered that first decade pretty well, I think. I mean, that's a good place to bookend it. From Street Fighter 2 to Street Fighter 3, that was like a decade of dominance for Capcom. And even though 3 and EX were a little bit of a side swipe, as it were, but they were still successful. They had nothing but success the whole time. No matter what people look back on and think of some of those games, they were all successful. They all ended up making money, except for a few hiccups with 3 and the first version of that one. But yeah, I mean, so much happened in that 10 years. It was a really exciting time, even for somebody like me who was mostly just watching it happen and very barely picking up a controller or going to the arcade and interacting with it. But it was still really a lot of fun to see it grow and expand, even as a partial observer. And watching it become part of the competitive fighting game scene, and then to the point where like it almost invented that whole thing, the esports thing, where now people were getting paid money to play Street Fighter. Who could have thought of that in 1992? So yeah, I mean, you can't overstate the impact and importance of Street Fighter, starting from 2 onward. Almost created a genre in and of itself, became a brand worth billions of dollars, and opened the door for so many things since. I mean, you had movies, cartoons, toys, action figures. We talked about it all, and what else could be said, I mean, it was a huge deal. It deserved to be a huge deal.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll wrap it up for this episode, but stay tuned. We'll be going more into like we said, we'll go into the versus games, Street Fighter 4. I think with Street Fighter 4, we'll go into Street Fighter Cross Tekken because it came out around that same
that's
thing.
its own story.
And then with Street Fighter Cross Tekken, it kind of led into more versus of Street Fighter 4. You know what I'm talking about? So we'll go into all that the next time. But yeah,
it's about the video games. I think you should just include all of them, like the Street Fighter versus X-Men versus Street Fighter, all those games plus the Street Fighter Cross Tekken. I think they should all be in that.
Yeah, but they kind of go hand in hand though, because Cross Tekken goes into Street Fighter 4 and vice versa. You know what I mean?
And the thing is, there's also just a lot to talk about, not just between Street Fighter Cross Tekken, but the fact of the canceled Tekken Cross Street Fighter, which people were very excited for, and obviously didn't come out because Street Fighter Cross Tekken sold very poorly. But that was its own thing. I mean, we still have a lot to talk about. But yeah, we're definitely going to talk about these two because I'm just happy I got it. I'm happy I got it. I paid a lot of money.
Those are rare and hard finds. So yeah, there's reasons.
Oh yeah.
There's good reasons to be happy. So anyways, guys, we'll wrap it up for this episode. America's second cure for insomnia. The Diamond Cutter podcast doesn't knock you out. This one will. This is Mark Rodriguez here.
William White, a.k.a. Ninja Panda 1980, signing out.
Winnie McBride, also known as Ninja Jupi or Jupi-chan, whichever you choose. Te wa mata.
Ricky Roxx, God of Thunder, Lord of Rock and Roll, signing off for the evening. Thanks so much. I had a great time talking about all things Street Fighter here on the Diving Cutter Fighting Podcast. It's been a great, great, great experience. Happy to be back. Looking forward to the next one. And I hope we educated you a little bit. And that was one man and one man only. There's no way I could ever follow him, so he's going on last. The one, the only, Mr. Electricity, Johnny Rodriguez.
Yes. See
And
you
to
next
close
time.
us off, Ninja Jupi, I think you know what quote you have to say to end the episode.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Remember, every time I play against Ryu online, you know what the quote is.
No. What strength? But remember, there are guys like you all over the world.
See you next time, guys.